We are on section 3.4 and we're talking about cells, and the learning outcome says state the function of the nucleus and distinguish between chromosomes and genes. I think that kind of vocabulary can be really confusing. So I put a picture back up here. It looks a little bit similar to the one we showed in an earlier video, where you can see individual eukaryotic cells and you see the nucleus, but right before the nucleus starts to divide, before the cell starts to divide, some strange things happen in the nucleus. So let's just back up. Remember, we had 4 groups of organic molecules. Which group contained DNA? See if you remember the names of the 4 groups of our organic macromolecules. And the one that contains DNA, remember, is a nucleic acid. DNA is a nucleic acid. It's a hereditary molecule passed from one generation to the next. Remember that it contains the instructions to make all the proteins. The proteins are the structural molecules and the enzymes of cells. So when we look in a cell, the nucleus of the cell is filled with DNA. DNA is the instructions on how to make the cell itself. Now, and then what happens is you can see here that it's all kind of blended together. But before the cell divides, the DNA kind of shortens up and forms these structures called chromosomes. So all these line things here are just long chains of DNA. They're pieces of DNA. And so a chromosome is a piece of DNA, or many pieces of DNA in each cell. Humans have 46 chromosomes, or 46 pieces of DNA in most of our cells. So they're trying to show you here that there's a cell, there's the nucleus, here's the chromosomes. In humans, there's 46 of these pieces. Why it's kind of in 2 pieces like an X, I'm not going to go into that right now, but these are just pieces of DNA, and they're trying to show you here, if you unravel this whole thing, here's your DNA. Okay, remember DNA is a double helix. So you can see that here. Here's the DNA all kind of smashed together, but then it kind of shortens up, and you can see distinct chromosomes in the cell here as it's dividing. So the chromosomes are still just DNA, the instructions on how to make a cell. Then a gene is just one chunk of that DNA. So a little piece of that DNA, a little piece of one chromosome, is a segment of a chromosome long enough to have the instructions to make a single protein. A gene's a piece of a chromosome long enough to code for a particular protein or have the instructions to make a protein. So one chromosome can have enough genes to make 1,000 different proteins. Okay, so if the DNA has the instructions on how to make all the proteins, then a gene is the instructions, enough DNA to just encode for one protein, the instructions for one protein. Sometimes I like to think about this as if you have a cookbook, the DNA is going to be your all the instructions on how to make your proteins. All the instructions. If you have a cookbook, your DNA is going to be all your recipes. It's going to be the whole book, the whole recipe book. Your chromosomes might be your chapters. This one tells you how to make cakes. This one tells you how to make meat. This one tells you how to make casseroles and whatever you like to make. Okay. Oh, there's a pasta recipes, So the chromosomes are going to be the separate chapters. A gene is going to be one page in the chapter. So here's one recipe that tells you how to make one certain kind of cake. In the human body, it's a recipe that tells you how to make one certain kind of protein. So DNA, chromosomes, and genes. Okay, the next learning outcome. So we looked at the nucleus. We're going to look at another part of the cell, and these are the ribosomes. And ribosomes are a certain kind of organelle. It turns out they're in all cells, both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Remember we said eukaryotes have a lot more organelles than prokaryotes, but the one thing that prokaryotes do have are ribosomes. You probably learned somewhere ribosomes are the site of protein synthesis. It's actually the place, the structure on which the proteins are made. Okay, and so if you look at this cell, First of all, where the heck are the ribosomes? There's this picture, this diagram doesn't show a lot of them, but here's a whole cluster of them. A lot of pictures will show you, a lot of cell cartoons will show you ribosomes all over the place. They're anywhere in the cytoplasm. They can be floating around. There's some right there. There's some right there. There's some there. There's a lot of them. There's this stuff called endoplasmic reticulum, and there's a lot of them on there. So you might see, they call it rough because it's got all these dots on it that are ribosomes. But there's probably thousands of ribosomes in a cell. They're these little structures that are the site of protein synthesis, or it's where the proteins are made. So let's go back and look at some things that you're familiar with. So this is the inside of a cell, and here's the nucleus, and here's some DNA, the DNA that makes up the chromosome. Now remember, when we talked about chemistry, we said the DNA has the instructions on how to make RNA, and then the RNA has the instructions on making a protein. So in this diagram, this double helix is the DNA, this red ribbon is the RNA, and the RNA is just a copy of the DNA, copy of one gene. And because it's smaller, it can get outside of the nucleus. It attaches to a ribosome. This brown thing's a ribosome. The ribosome positions it and kind of reads it off and makes the proteins. Do you remember the building blocks of proteins? What are the units that make up proteins? Hopefully you remember they are amino acids. So here's some amino acids. Here's the instructions from the RNA on how to make that protein. The amino acids and the RNA come together at the ribosome, and then you hook the right amino acids together in the right order, and you make a protein. So ribosomes are the site of protein synthesis. We absolutely need proteins for cells to function. The other structure I want to talk about as far as cell structures, we're going to skip a lot of them, but here's a couple I want you to know about. You probably heard of flagella and cilia. And so flagella are the ones that are probably most memorable because they're just single long extensions and they allow the cells to swim. And so here's a picture, and again, this would be magnified like something you could do in the laboratory. And these are sperm cells. They're the only cells in the human body that have flagella, these long extensions that allow the cells to swim. So here's like the main part of the cell, and then it's got this tail called the flagella. There's a head and there's a tail. And these tails allow, here's a good one, flagella, or here's the head of the sperm and the tail. And the flagella allow these sperm to swim from up through the vagina. So when a man ejaculates, you get the semen in the vagina, the sperm are in there, they have to swim up through the cervix, they've got to go up here through the fallopian tube, and if there's an egg that popped out of the ovary, it's going to fertilize the egg right here. And then that egg is going to move and get implanted back in the uterus. But those sperm cells have to be able to make this journey up here to meet the egg. So they have flagella. They're the only human cells that have flagella. Another structure on the outside of cells that is important for movement are cilia. And cilia are hair-like structures. So when a cell has cilia, they've got lots of them. And again, not all cells have cilia, but when they do have cilia, they're going to be all over covering the surface of the cell. And in the case of human cells, cilia do not move the cell itself. They move things over the surface of the cell. So what they're showing you here is all these little extensions are cilia. This happens to be an egg cell. And these cilia, as they move, they're going to sweep the egg along. So when I said that egg needs to move from this ovary down the fallopian tube into the uterus, it's these cilia that are going to be pushing the egg along. And so you'll find cilia lining these fallopian tubes that are going to pull the egg into the fallopian tubes and move it along into the uterus. So the cilia are going to move the egg over the surface of their own cells. Here's another example where you'd find cilia in the respiratory tract. So this is a kind of a cross-section of some cells that might be in the trachea, for example, in your windpipe. And there's all these cilia on the surface, these little hair-like structures. There's also a lot of mucus, which is why they're pointing to goblet cells. They're going to make mucus. And so what happens is when you breathe in dust, it gets trapped in this mucus, and the cilia move. They sweep the mucus along, and they actually sweep it into your throat, and you swallow it into your stomach, so you don't breathe it in. So your respiratory tract has a lot of cilia to move particles out of your respiratory tract. I'm going to skip that. Okay, I'm going to stop there.